Welcome everyone. It's noon, so we're going to get started. Thank you all for being here for our welcome/orientation meeting for participants of NYSCASA Sexual Assault Demonstration Initiative, also referred to as the SADI. To cover some logistics before we dive in, this session is being recorded and we'll be able to share it with you later if you need to step away for whatever reason. We realize many of you have more obligations than you can count, so feel free to do what you need to do. Live captioning is also available. To view the captions as subtitles, you'll click the button that says live transcript or closed captioning at the bottom of your screen in Zoom and select to enable subtitles. If you encounter any tech issues, if you can't see the screen I'm sharing, or if subtitles aren't working, or anything that Zoom throws your way, please let us know in the chat and we'll do our best to remedy that. Please enter any questions you have in the chat box. We'll address questions as they come if needed, but our goal is to address questions at the end of the presentation. With that said, we're going to move a little bit further. Our goals today, folks who are going to be participating in the NYSCASA SADI will meet others who are going to be on this journey with them. You'll gain a greater understanding of the SADI model and some lessons learned from other SADIs across the US. And we'll develop some shared language and values that'll ground our work going forward. We'll learn a little bit more about the cohort activities, expectations, and the timeline. So we'd love to know who's here today, what you do, and please in the chat, share your name and pronouns, what organization you're here with and what you do there. And we'd also love to know what song has inspired you lately. We're going to take these songs and create a playlist that we can use that inspires us and opens our meetings going forward. So please feel free to chime in the chat. And while we do that, I'll ask some of the NYSCASA staff that are here to do the same. I'll model first. My name is Chell Miller. I use they, them pronouns. I'm with the New York State Coalition Against Sexual Assault, and I am the communications director. Lately, anything by Janelle Monáe seems to kind of inspire and motivate me to just keep going. Between, kind of the upbeatness and queerness, I find a lot of home there. I'm going to pop it over to Sarah because you're the first person I see.
Sure. Hello, everyone. It's great to meet y'all. I am Sarah Padber. I'm the prevention director at the New York State Coalition Against Sexual Assault. My pronouns are she, her, and a song. I would say pretty much anything by Taina Seeley. In particular, I've been listening to her song Love a lot. So that's me. I'll pop it over to Joanne.
Thanks, Sarah. Hi, everyone. I'm Joan Sinoni. My pronouns are she, her. I'm the executive director of the New York State Coalition Against Sexual Assault. And I am totally going to date myself with my song choice. But the song that has been popping into my head a lot lately is Whitney Houston's One Moment in Time. And I was like hesitant to share that with all of you, but then a contestant on one of the singing shows, like maybe American Idol, just sang it the other night. So I thought that was a sign to share that with you.
Sing it for us, Joanne.
You know, I'm not going to do that. I'm laughing so hard because Josie and I have a bit of a running joke with each other. But Josie, how about you introduce yourself?
Oh, okay, yes. Well, I'm Joan McPherson. I'm the director, senior director of system advocacy here at NYSCASA. She and her are my pronouns, and I saw John Batista lately, but I gotta say my son has been running around. Damn it. Just
You're
making
good,
sure my
Josie.
internet is still,
Yeah.
okay, good. Just making sure my internet is still going. My son running around singing Build Me Up Buttercup. So that always gets us moving and feeling happy. So yeah. And I'm gonna pop it over to Chris.
Hey, everybody. Good afternoon. I totally forgot about like picking a song. And I had a heads up on this, but I'm going to pick the one I have mounted, the words mounted on my wall here, because I just love it. And my pronouns are she, her, they. I'm the Senior Director of Collaboration and Training at NYSCASA. And the song I'm going to share is, I'm not going to sing it or anything like that, but you can pull it up if you're interested. Spinning Away by Brian Eno and John Cale. And I get the honors of popping it over to someone else. Is that how we're doing it?
Let me take a look at what's going on in the chat. Really, thank you all for chiming in. I am seeing some fabulous songs. Ain't No Mountain High Enough has been stuck in my head for the past 2 weeks. So I think it was meant to be included in this playlist.
Sounds great.
Mm-hmm. I
can hear that one.
Fabulous. Wonderful. Thank you, everyone. Please keep it coming if you haven't finished typing yet. We love to see who's here. And, to dive a little bit deeper into who's here, we'll share which programs are going to be, collaborating with each other and who their primary contact is going to be. So in cohort A, which will be focusing on enhancing sexual assault services and outreach, we've got folks from the Arab American Family Support Center, the Westchester Medical Center SAVE program. We've got Crisis Services, Barrier Free Living, and SEPA Mujer. The primary contact for this group will be Josie McPherson, and her email is jmcpherson@NYSCASA.org. She is waving. And the next group, cohort B, will be focusing on strengthening prevention efforts. This group will consist of staff from Crisis Services, Wellspring, the Center for Safety and Change, Vera House, and Policy Research International. The primary contact for this group will be Sarah Podber. Her email is spodber@NYSCASA.org. She is the one on camera with the beautiful green earrings. And the final group, cohort C, will focus on mitigating vicarious trauma in professionals who are addressing sexual assault. We've got Crisis Services, staff from Wellspring, Center for Safety and Change, Vera House, Policy Research International, and Legal Services of the Hudson Valley. For folks working on this group in mitigating vicarious trauma, your primary contact will be Chris Ballerano, whose email is cballerano@NYSCASA.org. And she's on camera with lots of the beautiful plants in the background. Fabulous. So we also wanted to share, who's here in terms of what counties are represented here. So we have representation from 10 organizations providing services to survivors in 17 counties across New York State. Bronx, Dutchess, Erie, Kings, New York, all the way through Onondaga, Saratoga County, Ulster County, Westchester County. And I'm loving seeing a discussion of songs in the chat. Phoebe Bridgers, yes. Awesome. So keep it coming if you haven't chimed in yet, but we're going to keep moving because we recognize everybody has limited time. So now I'm going to turn it over to Joan Sinoni, who will be covering some background on the resource sharing project SADI and some lessons learned.
Thanks, Chel. Yes, we wanted everyone to have at least some foundational background information about the original resource sharing project, SADI, the Sexual Assault Demonstration Initiative. It originally was funded by the U.S. Department of Justice's Office on Violence Against Women, and the National Resource Sharing Project and the National Sexual Violence Resource Center were the organizations that actually implemented the project. The Resource Sharing Project is a small group of state sexual assault coalitions that provide training and technical assistance to all the state sexual assault coalitions. The National Sexual Violence Resource Center, which is run by the State Sexual Assault Coalition in Pennsylvania, serves as a general clearinghouse of information and resources, and also provides other types of support to state sexual assault coalitions. In the original SADI, 6 sites across the United States participated in that project, which involved a multi-year process to build capacity. One of the sites was the New York Asian Women's Center, now known as Womankind, in New York City. And NYSCASA played a small but supportive role as this site engaged in the SADI process. For those of us working specifically in the field to address sexual violence, we're aware that sexual assault intervention and prevention can get lost in different ways when it's part of an organization that has one or more other areas of focused work. The SADI was designed to take a deeper look at this and to address the difficulties that dual and multi-service programs face in reaching and then providing high quality and appropriate services to sexual assault survivors. The SADI project began about a decade ago, and the site-specific work ended roughly 5 years ago, but its positive impacts continue. There are a few state coalitions that have replicated this project and have gotten similar results. And also the lessons learned have been shared with state sexual assault coalitions, as well as state administrators of funding streams that have supported or may support sexual assault services. So now let's move on to some of the actual lessons. There are like 3 overarching lessons that were learned from the original SADI. So first of all, we don't know what we don't know. We may not even know enough to be able to ask the questions that would gain us helpful knowledge, skills, resources, or other types of support. Each of us has blind spots, and that's true for both individuals and organizations. At the start of the original SADI, programs that participated tended to be overly confident in the effectiveness of the services they were providing to sexual assault survivors. What the technical assistance providers and the funder, OVW, program managers, noted, and also the sites themselves reported, was that At the start of the SADI program, the staff tended to think they were serving sexual assault survivors well. The primary problem they saw at that time was they were not reaching as many survivors as they wanted to reach, but they were not yet aware of fundamental changes they needed in their approach to the services they were delivering. Program staff reported that if they knew at the beginning of the SADI what they knew at the end, they would have rated many areas of program effectiveness much lower at the beginning of the project. This is why the project starts off with an assessment phase. It helps SADI sites gain some key insights and revelations from the data that then informs future plans and implementation. Let's move on to the next lesson. As hard as the first lesson is, this one can sometimes be more difficult. We must acknowledge the ways we are not meeting the needs of our communities. This includes the survivors we work with, the survivors that are not coming to us, our staff, our volunteers, and the many communities in our service areas. I know that this acknowledgement can be very difficult. Those of us in the helping professions often feel a great amount of turmoil over unmet needs, and nevertheless, the first step towards positive change is to acknowledge the areas that require our attention. In the original SADI, the community assessments revealed that programs were not reaching certain survivor populations, and the organizational assessments and ongoing training revealed that dual and multi-service programs lacked a fundamental understanding of sexual assault and the kinds of services that survivors needed to support their healing. Let's move on to lesson 3. Okay, so once we have the information and know that there are areas we can do a better job, to make those next steps, we really do need to be willing to engage in individual and organizational self-reflection. We know that individuals can make a difference, but we also know that progress is made much more easily, quickly, and smoothly if those individuals are supported by larger circles, such as organizations and their communities. And this is why we required both a frontline service provider and someone with decision-making authority from each of your organizations participating in this process. What I'm describing is known as the socio-ecological model, and it has been widely used to promote effective sexual violence prevention work. We may not describe it in the same ways, but the concept of this model, where we work to address structural and institutional changes, often through policy and systems advocacy, has been a centerpiece of sexual violence intervention as well. One area, though, where these ideas could use a boost is vicarious or secondary trauma, where self-care is emphasized and organizational care is hardly ever discussed. So in the original SADI, all 6 SADI sites became more aware of the secondary trauma their staff were experiencing and that their organizations were not adequately supporting, how their organizations were not adequately supporting their staff. Vicarious trauma became a common point of discussion within the programs and with technical assistance providers. Implementing strategies and policies to more effectively support staff was a goal of all the sites' plans in the original SADI. The extent to which programs supported their own staff was seen as directly influencing the quality of services that could be provided to clients. I think that generally provides a overview of the main lessons that were learned. Tel, I'm going to turn it back to you to talk about some shared values.
Great, thank you. So building on the lessons learned from the national SADI and SADIs in other states, as well as the ongoing work that NYSCASA has been doing and that we see many sexual assault programs throughout the state doing, is we wanted to establish some shared values to ground our work going forward. The first value is that sexual violence survivors have varied needs and deserve to have those needs met. Survivors are not a homogeneous group with all of the same needs. Survivors have unique and wide-ranging needs, and their needs must shape the services that we offer. For example, we might consider what kinds of services and modes of communication would be most relevant to the following sample survivors: a middle-aged or elderly survivor of childhood sexual abuse who is seeking help with processing feelings or memories, or a teen experiencing sexual harassment by a classmate who's unsure of what to do and is apprehensive to call a helpline, or a survivor whose preferred language is Spanish and who is interested in regular supportive counseling appointments. So each of these sample survivors, who are not representative of all survivors, will have different needs and there will be different kinds of services and modes of communication that will be most relevant to them. The second value we want to underscore is that we can't end sexual violence without ending other forms of oppression, because oppression is a root cause of sexual violence. When we talk about oppression, we mean a relationship of dominance and subordination between categories of people in which one benefits from the systematic abuse, exploitation, and injustice directed toward the other. Oppression shapes what is recognized as violence, who is most vulnerable to experiencing or witnessing violence, what healing and justice options are available, and how those who commit violence are treated and held accountable. Oppressive structures promote sexual and domestic violence, and they discourage cultural norms of healthy, collaborative, mutually respectful relating and relationships. We believe that all survivors benefit when advocates and our organizations recognize both the shared roots of domestic and sexual violence and how the experience of oppression shapes survivors' varied needs. And building off of this, because oppression is a root cause of sexual violence and oppression discourages community building, then our third value is that anti-oppression work is sexual violence prevention and community building work. Anti-oppression values that promote violence prevention include trust, respect, intimacy, consent, mutuality, shared power, self-determination, intergenerational community, shared responsibility, and interdependence. These values decrease sexual and domestic violence and promote healthy relationships and communities. Anti-oppression practices that promote violence prevention include shifting our focus upstream, valuing and uplifting positive relationships between youth and adults, deep listening and deep learning, understanding historical trauma and intergenerational woundedness and healing, as well as resilience, prioritizing equity, grounded empowerment in contrast to exploitative power over others, and reframing concepts of leadership, organizational structures, and outcomes, as well as shifting from allyship to organizational and individual solidarity. We've learned from our peers at other coalitions that conventional sexual and relationship violence prevention work, while it may achieve positive outcomes for young people and communities from dominant cultural groups who are white, middle class, able-bodied, or cisgender, etc., these modes of prevention work typically fall short of addressing the oppression dynamics and power dynamics that deeply affect violence, sexuality, and relationships for people from marginalized communities. We've also learned from social movements, largely generated and led by marginalized people, working to embody these values and demanding change from the powers that be, that have contributed to sexual and domestic violence prevention in ways that might not be immediately apparent. We're thinking particularly of the civil rights movement, the Americans with Disabilities Act movement, Title IX, more recently, Water is Life, Black Lives Matter, trans and non-binary activism, and Dreamers have all contributed to the prevention of sexual and relationship violence, because every group that gets a bit more free regains resilience against sexual, domestic, and other forms of harm and violence. And people in those groups become less likely to enact violence on one another. The final value I'd like to share builds on some of what Joanne shared earlier. Effectively addressing vicarious trauma requires care and support at multiple levels, including the individual, organizational, and community spheres. When we talk about vicarious trauma, we mean experiencing trauma symptoms that can result from being repeatedly exposed to or bearing witness to the traumatic experiences of another. As Joanne shared earlier, all of the sites that participated in the national SADI became more aware of the secondary trauma or vicarious trauma that their staff experienced. And they realized that they were not adequately supporting staff who experienced trauma, whether they've experienced it directly in their own lives or indirectly through their work. Vicarious trauma has also become a common point of discussion in our site visits, in regional coalition meetings, and in statewide meetings. As Joanne shared earlier, most of the resources we've seen about how to address vicarious trauma focus on self-care, which takes an individualized approach to managing stress and trauma exposure. This is important, but it's not a complete picture, and an individualized approach can't solve structural issues that many program staff and